obviously been in war, but that's what I would imagine war to be. It was just horrible.
There was a car that drove through. I could see that the driver was staring straight ahead. Could have clearly seen that they were running over people.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Put your hands up! Hands up!
That's how my story ends. That's all I've been thinking about.
Mr. Brooks insisted on representing himself in this trial.
And I do not consent or agree to being called that name.
Stop gesturing at me. Stop rolling your eyes.
Judge, do you hold the full
Mr.
judicial
Brooks,
power of the state, or is this the military
All right, can
power?
you please take the jury out? I will give you the warning. You will forfeit your right to be in the courtroom today.
Let's talk in the courtroom. Let's go.
When Darrell Brooks drove his red SUV through the Waukesha, Wisconsin holiday parade, he killed 6 people and injured more than 60 others. But that wasn't all. He would extend that chaos he created at the parade into a Wisconsin courtroom in one of the most bizarre trials in American judicial history. This is Victim to Verdict. About 20 minutes west of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, sits the city of Waukesha, a growing community nestled on the shores of the Fox River with award-winning parks and a historic downtown.
I would say it's one of the best downtowns in the country, believe it or not.
The city's downtown district hosts concerts, farmers markets, a scenic river walk, and its annual Christmas parade.
The Christmas parade has been a tradition for nearly 60 years. People brave the cold Wisconsin weather. They stand on the side of the road and they celebrate together.
The community gathered on November 21st, 2021, on the sidewalks of Main Street to hear the festive music and watch the parade, which included the beloved group, the Dancing Grannies.
We were like sisters. We were a sisterhood. We do lots of parades. We do about 21 of them in summer and about 5 to 6 in winter.
I was there with 3 of my 4 children, one of which was playing on my baseball team.
It was somewhat cold, so we had different, trying to stay generally speaking warm. We had some little, very small kind of lights that were kind of carrying that sense of kind of bringing the light of Christ into Christmas.
The parade went from celebration to chaos in a matter of seconds when a red SUV Ford Escape started barreling down Main Street.
This all happened so fast and without warning.
I don't believe what I just saw. A car just came through and hit people.
There was a whole bunch of little kids standing right in the road. He ran right over them.
It went from this wholesome event to complete chaos. There were reports of shots fired.
Shots fired. Shots fired. Come on. Shots fired.
We just saw the red SUV come and kind of hit people who were sitting on the side of the road, and it just went so fast, and he just flew by, and we saw his face and him hanging onto the wheel and just looking straight with this blank look on his face.
The red SUV seemed to careen through the crowd. No one seemed to be able to stop it, including police.
When I saw the red SUV traveling toward me at a high rate of speed, I used both hands and waved them overhead like this in an attempt to catch the attention of the driver. As the driver passed essentially in front of me by about 6 feet, I could see the operator of the vehicle and just a dazed, straight focused look straight ahead, not looking at anyone.
Bodies were flying in the air and people landed in front of us, and then he was gone. You could hear the sound of thump, 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 thump. You just kept hearing that sound.
It's the most terrible thing I ever heard.
Dozens of people were injured, some more seriously than others, and people with family members were desperately trying to find their loved ones. Jackson Sparks was just 8 years old. He was marching in the parade with his 12-year-old brother Tucker, representing the Waukesha Blazers youth baseball team. They were both struck by that red SUV. Tucker suffered a fractured skull. He survived, but little Jackson passed away just a few days later.
Jackson Sparks would end up being the youngest fatality that day. In addition to the Little League team, the red SUV would barrel through several groups, including a youth dance group, the Waukesha High School Marching Band, and the Dancing Grannies.
I didn't see them get hit because it all happened so quick that I was still dancing. And all of a sudden, I seen the red car in front of me, and I screamed either in my head or out loud. I don't know which. But I said, what is he doing? Where's he going?
It was just absolute chaos. There were civilian subjects lying on the ground in every direction I looked, screaming, yelling.
There was what I would call screaming on the radio. I was stopped by numerous people who said that their children had potentially been nicked. The worst one was a adolescent female that was laying in the road with her family around her.
I'm yelling stop and pounding on the hood and trying to get the person's attention so they can stop. The vehicle kept going. It pushed right through me.
Where it all took place. Came barreling down this road about 50 miles an hour, hit everybody who was in the parade. That's what I would imagine war to be, just bodies all over, and it was just horrible, and screams and fear and people.
In a matter of minutes, that red SUV would kill 6 people and injure more than 60 others, shocking not only the state of Wisconsin, but the entire country.
The people of Waukesha were gathered to celebrate the start of a season of hope and togetherness and Thanksgiving. I'm sure all of us pray that that same spirit's going to embrace and lift up all the victims of this tragedy.
Eventually, the red SUV swerved off of Main Street, and while first responders were overwhelmed with the victims and the carnage, they knew the other priority at that moment was to find that vehicle and the driver, who, they would soon find out, was a man named Darrell Brooks.
I saw an SUV driving behind the houses on the west side of Maple. As I lost visual of the SUV, was driving behind houses, I heard a crash. He came around to the front of the vehicle, looked at it, and yelled, and appeared to be panicked, went back and got items out of the driver's side of the vehicle and then ran southbound.
I thought Mr. Brooks tried jumping the fence, and that's how he lost the first sandal. And I located a children's playhouse. I located the gray hooded sweatshirt that had a multicolored design. The same sweatshirt that we believe Mr. Brooks was wearing during that parade incident.
I found on the side of my garage. I asked him, what in the effing hell is he doing? It just seemed off because he was wearing a t-shirt, he was not wearing shoes. His eyes were huge.
Police found Darrell Brooks standing on someone's front porch trying to convince him to call him an Uber.
Hey, I'll call the Uber. And I'm supposed to be waiting for it over here, but I don't know when it's coming. Can you call it for me, please?
About 5 o'clock, my Ring doorbell goes off, and then there's a gentleman at my front porch knocking on the door saying that they're homeless, they're cold, and they need to use my phone so that they can tell their Uber where to pick them up.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground!
He was illuminated by the officers with a flashlight. Mr. Brooks placed his hands in the air, stepped off the porch, stepped into the grass of the front yard, and went down onto the ground prone, chest down, entirely on his own.
He identified himself as Darrell Brooks.
Darrell Brooks was taken into custody without a fight, but when he got into a courtroom, that would change.
Coming up, Darrell Brooks in court.
Well, something always funny at that table. It would be the same thing. I'll take that as disrespect.
Plus, Judge Jennifer Dorow.
I don't care if you don't like my tone. You've been pushing my buttons all day.
In November of 2021, Darrell Brooks drove his mother's red Ford SUV through the Waukesha, Wisconsin Christmas Parade, injuring over 60 people and killing 6. The question immediately for investigators was why? Was this an act of terrorism or something else? As it turned out, for Darrell Brooks, this all started with a fight with his girlfriend down the street.
A few minutes before the rampage, Darrell Brooks is down the street at Frame Park. He's getting into a fight with his ex-girlfriend and mother of his child, Erica Patterson. Erica says the fight turned physical and Darrell Brooks got in his red SUV and he took off.
We were messaging and calling each other all day. We were arguing back and forth. Me and him got into an altercation. He hit me in my eye.
I could hear him yelling at her, "I'm gonna kill you, you know, you really messed up." And I heard Erica screaming.
He was just mad. He just left very angry. He just drove off fast. He was mad they called the cops.
After being taken into custody, Darrell Brooks told police that it wasn't him at all in that red SUV and that he was only in the area because he was watching the Green Bay Packers play football with his friend.
I was meeting up with a friend to watch the Packer game. Okay. That's the only reason why I was out here.
Detectives would confront Brooks with video of him behind the wheel of the SUV, which, they pointed out, was registered to his mother. Still, he continued to deny that it was him.
Hey, you? See your face. No, that's not me.
So at this point, Mr. Brooks is offering up to Detective Stern that there's a possibility that someone else may have been driving the vehicle.
What if it wasn't me driving? What if it wasn't you? What if it was my mom's truck? But I wasn't driving.
The evidence at that point, it indicated his mother's vehicle drove through the route, that he was the individual driving through the parade route when the vehicle went through the route. And I was looking for explanations why he's not willing to do that.
What I want you to see is like watching all I'm thinking about right now is what a hell of a journey it's been, but this is how my story ends. That's all I've been thinking about.
Darrell Brooks was charged with 6 counts of murder and dozens of other charges involving the parade. He was also charged with domestic battery involving that altercation with his girlfriend, Erica Patterson.
State of Wisconsin versus Darrell Brooks. Anytime you have a case with a large number of charges, it can be more and more complicated because what you have to do is prove up every single element of every single charge.
What nobody knew at the time of that first court appearance is how truly complicated this case was going to be because of Darrell Brooks.
Most defendants don't say anything at all. They just sit there inside the courtroom. They let their attorneys do most of the talking. But not Darrell Brooks. He had something to say about everything.
All this political, this is show. Y'all getting told with it.
Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks.
Y'all
Mr. Brooks.
know nothing about where I come from.
Mr. Brooks.
Push me, dog. Don't push back. No, I'm worried about, man. Don't put your hand on me, dude.
Nobody put their hands on you.
Hey, yeah, they better not put their hand on me.
Okay, Mr. Brooks, you need to look at me for a minute, okay? It's been a long day and a half.
Get your hands off me.
We'll come back at 12:30.
Just told you, get off me.
The person assigned to handling this case was Chief Judge of the 3rd District of Wisconsin Circuit Courts, Judge Jennifer Dorow.
Brooks decides to represent himself just a few days before jury selection begins. Judge Dorow believes this is just another tactic for him to delay this trial process.
Is it your desire to represent yourself in this case?
It is. I would like to proceed in this matter per persona.
What I had every so often were what are called pro se defendants, those who aren't represented. And what happens is it creates a wild card. You don't quite know what they're gonna do. I mean, the 6th Amendment says you have the right to represent yourself if you want to do that. But the problem is they don't really know what they're doing.
There's no evidence before the court to suggest he has a severe mental illness, which is why, of course, I looked at the NGI evaluations because that is competent, recent information before this court regarding his mental status and his understanding of what is going
The first thing that judges usually do is they want to make sure that they're competent to represent themselves. So in other words, they got to make sure that they understand that they have the right to have an attorney, that they're going to give up that right, and they're sufficiently competent in order to do so.
He is voluntarily and freely waiving the right to be represented by counsel and is making a deliberate choice to proceed without counsel, and therefore the court will grant the motion to withdraw. And from this point forward, Mr. Brooks will proceed as his own attorney.
Frequently, what we're seeing is somebody with no experience, no education, no background, no capability, no understanding of any of this, who can come in and say blindly, guess what, I can do this myself. They're going to hold them to the very same standard as if they were a lawyer.
Darrell Brooks begins the process of representing himself, and it was clear even before the trial began that this was going to be a problem, starting with jury selection, where Brooks tried to eliminate every single possible juror.
You do not have the right to be that disruptive.
Eventually, a jury was picked, and it was time for the start of trial, which, again, Darrell Brooks tried to sabotage.
On the first day of the trial, immediately, Darrell Brooks begins fighting with Judge Dorow.
Mr. Brooks, you just interrupted me within a minute of us starting this case here today.
With all due respect, Your Honor,
Saying all due respect doesn't change the fact that you're interrupting me. Your objection is noted.
She has to banish him to the courtroom next door for acting up, but that doesn't help. He continues to be out of order, delaying opening statements on the very first day.
The judge has the power to remove a defendant if that person is being a distraction. And the question frequently is, they're simply removed outright. The idea that what she did was somewhat of a half measure.
You can see that he is seated with his back to the court or to the camera. He took his shirt off as well. I'm also told that he is threatening to throw and break items. It is simply another tactic of his to disrupt, to delay, to create chaos.
Coming up, the state presents its case against Darrell Brooks.
There was a car that drove through.
And Judge Dorow does her best to try to keep the trial moving.
Stop gesturing at me. Stop rolling your eyes at me. Stop mumbling.
I'm looking right at you. I'm not rolling my eyes.
No, you have throughout.
4 University of Idaho students were found brutally murdered.
If I'm the parent of one of these poor kids, he is the boogeyman.
The Case Against Brian Kohberger premieres next Sunday night, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
In October of 2022, after numerous delays, including a decision to represent himself, Darrell Brooks stood trial for the Waukesha Christmas Parade Rampage that killed 6 and injured more than 60 others. Because of his numerous outbursts leading up to the trial, Judge Jennifer Dorow made the decision to remove Brooks at times from the main courtroom and put him into an adjacent room with a video and audio feed. He was given an objection sign, and she had a mute button. Just before opening statements, Judge Dorow invited Darrell Brooks back into the main courtroom.
I certainly am willing to have you brought back over while the state gives their opening statement. I know you're holding up your objection sign, sir. Would you like to come back to this courtroom?
So I can get sent back over here, because as soon as I say something, I'm going to get sent out.
Mr. Brooks, it's your conduct in this courtroom. It is what dictates the court's response. If you follow the rules of decorum and courtesy and civility, you will remain.
Do you see these boxes I got right here? Do you think I was able to go through everything in those boxes?
Mr. Brooks, I'm not going to go through this with you again, where you attempt to put on the record all of these issues that you have when we're in the middle of a trial. All right? You willingly waived your right to an attorney. I made all of those findings, so we will go forward.
You made those findings.
I am not obligated to answer questions. When you ask me questions, I'm going to mute him.
As he continued to wave his arms and object, Judge Dorow went forward with the state's opening statement in the main courtroom in front of the jury without Darrell Brooks.
Thousands of people were bundling up and going downtown to watch the annual Waukesha Christmas Parade. The streets were lined with friends and family members and neighbors, people there to soak up the atmosphere. You'll see from the videos, there was a true sense of joy in the air. Darrell Brooks killed that joy. He replaced it with terror, trauma, and death. The evidence will show that he left that crime scene because he was fleeing from another one where he had laid his hands on a woman and where police involvement became inevitable. So as he careened down Main Street, swerving from curb to curb, hands glued to the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road in front of him with a silent rage on his face, he hit the gas with his red Ford Escape and used it as a battering ram over and over again, striking men, women, and kids.
Over the next several weeks, the state presented its case against Darrell Brooks. For most of it, he was in the main courtroom acting as his own attorney, which included cross-examining the state's witnesses, from lead detectives to victims and his ex-girlfriend, Erica Patterson.
First of all, good morning.
Good morning.
And happy birthday.
Thank you.
This case was so unique in many ways. The prosecution would call victim witnesses to the stand to describe what would happen. And not only do they have to sit there and look at the man who's accused, but then they had to sit there while he cross-examined them with questions that would drone on for what seemed like forever.
So you didn't say anything at all during your 30 minutes with the alleged defendant?
No, because I was crying the whole time because Mr. Brooks was yelling at me, arguing with me.
Why didn't you file a report with law enforcement on November the 20th after you alleged that you were abused?
Because I've been dealing with it for so many years, I just didn't do it. I don't see what this has anything to do with this case.
You were not drinking on both of those days that you cite, the 20th or the 21st?
The 20th.
Hold on. Mr. Brooks, under 90611, I'm stopping this cross-examination. You've asked the same question, multiple questions, multiple times, and at this point, I'm going to declare that the opportunity to cross is now concluded.
I didn't know that was the same question, Your Honor.
Mr. Brooks, it's been asked and answered multiple times.
When Brooks cross-examined his former girlfriend, it broke my heart like it broke so many people's hearts, because the system is designed to be a shield. It's designed to protect people. It's designed to make sure that you go after those who do terrible things.
One of the most uncomfortable moments in the courtroom was when Darrell Brooks cross-examined Jeffrey Rogers, 8-year-old Jackson Sparks baseball coach.
Any reason why you would not try to identify the driver?
Because my children were about to be struck.
Any reason why you would not try to see if you can catch a license plate number?
Because people had just been hit.
There were moments inside the courtroom where the defendant seemed to want all eyes on him even more than what they already were. He would say, "Oh, I need a moment," and he would look to collect himself or dab his eyes or hold up the Bible that he would bring to court every day. He was definitely putting on a show in more ways than one.
Mr. Brooks, you may start your questioning of this witness then.
I'm sorry about that. I just needed a second. I apologize to the witnesses. A little emotional right now for me, so I apologize to the court as well for the delay.
At one point during the testimony of a dance coach who had 14 of her girls injured in the parade massacre, a prosecutor objected to Darrell Brooks' behavior.
I have to step in here and request that Mr. Brooks be instructed to stop making comments under his breath. This witness is very clearly having an emotional and difficult time testifying, and she doesn't need to hear that.
Objection, she can't hear anything I'm saying.
There were certain aspects of what Brooks did that created a lot of hatred against Mr. Brooks. This is one of the reasons you want to have a lawyer to try to stop you from doing stupid stuff, horrible stuff, stuff that's going to get you convicted. Those are the kinds of things that put you in a cell for the rest of your life.
Coming up, it's Darrell Brooks' turn to put on his case as he forces his ex-girlfriend to come back to court.
Do you recognize these pictures?
Then, the friction between Darrell Brooks and Judge Dorow hits a boiling point.
No integrity whatsoever. How can you even call yourself a
Mr.
judge?
Brooks, I need to make a record.
A brilliant law professor gunned down.
In the midst of a bitter custody battle.
Now the victim's former brother-in-law, a prominent South Florida dentist,
accused of being the mastermind behind the murder.
Florida prosecutors are setting their sights on Charlie Adelson.
3 people have already been convicted for their role in the plot.
Now, will Charlie Adelson's own words come back to haunt him?
The dentist mastermind murder trial. Live coverage weekday mornings on Court TV.
Darrell Brooks was accused of killing 6 people and injuring more than 60 others by driving his SUV through the Waukesha, Wisconsin Christmas Parade in November of 2021. During his trial, Brooks decided to represent himself, and after weeks of testimony, the frustration level in the courtroom continued to increase as the state of Wisconsin presented its case.
We haven't addressed subject
All right,
matter
thank you.
jurisdiction yet at all.
Everyone, please be seated. The jury will disregard the statements Mr. Brooks is making about subject matter jurisdiction. They are a misstatement of the law.
As this trial inched closer and closer to a conclusion, it seemed that Darrell Brooks was becoming more and more disruptive, trying to do everything he could to delay the inevitable.
I have no idea what you're talking about. So
I got the paperwork right here.
all right, I'm going to excuse the jury right now, given this disruption. Mr. Brooks, I'm going to continue with this trial, whether you believe jurisdiction has been proven or
It has not been proven for the record.
A second copy was provided to you. I know you saw it because you tore it up. Please, I'm asking you to stop. Please
You can't
listen.
just disregard the United States Constitution. Are you holding me in contempt?
I'm not answering your questions.
So then you're not holding me in contempt.
Do not interrupt me again or you will go to the other courtroom.
You could feel Judge Dorow's frustration. She's trying to manage this uncontrollable defendant with the goal of moving the trial along, but at the same time, preserving his constitutional rights.
The back and forth between Judge Dorow and Darrell Brooks was not only extremely frustrating for the victims' families, but also for lead prosecutor Susan Opper.
The court is well aware. There's nothing that...
Hold on, sir. Stop interrupting.
This court has been abundantly patient with Mr. Brooks. He challenges the court's authority repeatedly. This court absolutely has the ability to tell him to sit down and be quiet. And you haven't done that. And I know why you haven't done that, Your Honor, and we appreciate that. He is not in control of this courtroom. You are. And he needs to respect that.
At the beginning, we were all very surprised of like, what is this and what is he doing? Over time, I hate to say it, but we just adapted and dealt with it.
At the end of the state's case, the chaos in the courtroom reached a new level when prosecutors introduced this video.
I just got a load worth about a half a ticket.
Of Darrell Brooks standing in front of that red SUV that the state says was used in the deadly rampage.
That video's relevant for a number of different reasons.
I just said that. You didn't even let me finish.
You're not letting me finish.
You didn't let me finish either, Your Honor.
Then you need to provide me with the legal basis for that, sir.
So I was supposed to already come in here this morning to say, oh, a video is going to be shown off the fly at the drop of a hat. Let me try to find some legal thing to combat. How am I supposed to do it?
The bottom line is you opened the door to the playing of that video.
We're not talking about
and the
opening
video was
doors.
Previously provided to you during discovery.
We're not talking about opening the doors. We're talking about being fair.
He did remind me of the sovereign citizen posse comitatus sort of mindset. But there was also that interesting sort of petulant child, spoiled brat sort of approach that went alongside that.
That's ridiculous.
You're representing yourself. It's not ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. If I don't understand, how do I know?
15 minutes.
How do I know what I'm supposed to answer if I don't understand?
Many people were getting frustrated with Judge Dorow, believing that she was letting Darrell Brooks take too much control of what was happening inside the courtroom.
When the judge returned, the state rested its case, and everyone in the courtroom was bracing for what would happen next, because it was time for Darrell Brooks, who, remember, is representing himself, to put on his defense.
In his defense case, Darrell Brooks calls to the stand his ex-girlfriend, Erica Patterson, in what seemed like an attempt to counteract the battery charge he was facing. But it didn't really help in his favor. It was more of an attempt to really just torture his ex-girlfriend.
November 21st, 2021. Would it be fair to say that you did meet up with the alleged defendant?
Yes.
When Brooks made the decision to bring his ex-girlfriend back when he had his own case, this sort of just was salt in the wound.
I don't know if you can see him from here, but do you recognize these pictures?
You need to show those to the state. The bail will take them. It's not proper procedure, sir.
It seemed as though Brooks, if given the opportunity, would have kept his ex on the stand for hours, but eventually, Judge Dorow stepped in and stopped it.
Under my authority, under 906.11, then I will declare that his questioning of her to be closed.
With Erica Patterson now gone, Brooks now set his sight on parade spectators. His goal was to try to establish the fact that while he was running people down in that red SUV, he was honking his horn. From his point of view, he did his best to warn people to get out of the way.
I heard honking. I'm not positive if it was the red SUV or another car.
It was a red vehicle. It was honking its horn.
In his defense, Darrell Brooks called some witnesses. He called some parade spectators to what it seemed like testify that he indeed honked the horn at times or tried to slow down the vehicle at times. But you could clearly tell inside the courtroom that the jury wasn't buying it. It really was not beneficial to him at all.
The vehicle caught my attention because people started yelling, and the driver was honking the horn.
What was the gesturing?
So he was taking his hand and going like this, really rapidly, aggressively. I took that gesturing as the driver was telling people to get out of his way.
I've been in a lot of courtrooms, but I have never seen anyone like Darrell Brooks. No matter what was going on, he seemed to have a problem with it.
Seems almost as if you're recalling what you want to recall and purposely not.
Objection. Badgering the witness.
Yes, sustained. You do not have to answer that, and you are warned. You may not badger or argue with this witness. Next question.
Badger or argue? What do you mean?
What that really means is when you get the question out there and the witness answers that question, if you come back at them again because you don't like the answer that you got, not with anything else, but you simply raise your voice and you lean in further, or you get a little bit closer, frankly, that's badgering a witness at that point.
The last question was badgering, which is a form.
But you said
Mr. Brooks, I've made my ruling under 906.11. Please ask a question or I will stop the questioning.
How did I intimidate?
Ask your next question or the questioning of this witness will end.
How are you even a judge?
All right, you may step down, ma'am. Thank you.
How are you even a judge?
Judge Dorow would ultimately close Brooks' defense case after many arguments with her and after he became unresponsive to the judge's questions.
Like, I don't even want to be in here that much longer. Just do what you got to do so I can get up out of here. I'm tired of being in the courtroom that has no integrity whatsoever. How can you even call yourself a judge?
Brooks, I need to make a record of some
I need to make a record too.
Mr. Brooks, you're being taken to the next courtroom.
Mr. Brooks, don't try to address me like that, like we cool. You don't have no integrity.
Coming up, the jury has a verdict.
Just a reminder to everyone that I do expect everyone in the courtroom to demonstrate appropriate decorum and courtesy as the verdicts are read.
Then it's the victim's turn to address Darrell Brooks.
I can only hope they lock you away someplace so deep the rats chew on your fingers at night.
After weeks of testimony and disruptions, the case against Darrell Brooks came to a head with closing arguments, but not before Brooks did his best to derail the proceedings once again.
I'm going to raise issues that the jury needs to know.
They're not.
Regardless.
A fair trial does not mean a defendant has unfettered rights to state whatever he wants, when he wants.
We're talking about closing arguments that I said it's my right to be able to inform the jury of the truth, their duties, and their rights.
Are you going to
answer questions as a public servant on why you're making up laws that are not in the Illinois versus Allen? It never utilized the mute button. It never said anything about a mute button.
It is clear that Mr. Brooks has absolutely no intention of following the simple rules of decorum.
So how can you invite me to do anything?
The courtroom is to be cleared so that Mr. Brooks can be removed to the next courtroom.
A fed-up Judge Jennifer Dorow had enough of Darrell Brooks and sent him to an adjacent courtroom where he could hold up his objection sign as lead prosecutor Susan Opper delivered her closing argument.
There's overwhelming evidence that this was an intentional act by Darrell Brooks and an act of utter disregard for human life. Not one person had to be hurt that day if he would have just stopped driving. It's time for Darrell Brooks to stop running. It's time for him to stop lying. It's time for him to be held accountable for his actions.
Brooks says he's going to deliver his closing argument from the heart, but he never accepts responsibility. He never apologizes to any of the parade victims. He does say that the incident was never intended.
Throughout this year, I've been called a lot of things. And to be fair, I am a lot of things. A murderer is not one of them.
There was a moment that raised a lot of eyebrows during his closing when he said his conscience was clear and that he didn't know why this was God's will for this to happen, as if he was a martyr.
For whatever mistakes that I myself have made in my life, I've made peace with God. I'm happy to say that my conscience is clear. Nobody will never know why it was his will for this to happen. And no matter how much sometimes we want to question, we have to have faith. Look inside yourself and make the right decision.
Then it was time for the jury to deliberate Darrell Brooks' fate. It took them just over 2 hours before coming back with a verdict. After everyone, including victim family members, assembled inside the courtroom, Judge Jennifer Dorow stood up and read the verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Darrell E. Brooks, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information.
Inside the courtroom during the reading of the verdicts, it is a packed house, victim family members, emotions at an all-time high as we sit to hear the decision for all 76 counts against Darrell Brooks. The judge starts reading the verdicts. She reads the first guilty verdict. After the second one, there was an outburst.
Did the defendant commit first-degree intentional homicide while using a dangerous weapon? Answer, yes.
Burn in hell, you piece of...
Hey, you are to be removed right now. You will not do that.
There is something called judicial demeanor. The idea that there are certain judges who just are wired to do this and they do this well. Judge Dorow was actually one of those people. When I watched what she did, she always seemed to keep her eye on the prize. And the prize in this case was a fair, balanced trial that protected his rights.
A few weeks after being found guilty, it was time for Darrell Brooks to sit and listen and allow victim family members to say their piece, including the mother of 8-year-old Jackson Sparks, who was killed by Brooks while marching with his brother and their youth baseball team in the Christmas parade.
I want to give a voice to our son, Jackson Sparks. Our family is forever changed. We are hurt, angry, traumatized, and broken. I wish I would have known then that the hug he gave me before I went to sit down was the last hug I would ever get from him. I would have held on to him a lot longer. Being the protective big brother, Tucker blamed himself. He felt he should have tried to grab Jackson or done more to protect his little brother. It broke my heart to hear him saying these things. His little brother was taken from him. He's suddenly an only child now. He misses his little brother and his playmate. We feel this man does not deserve to see freedom in our lifetime, nor our son Tucker's lifetime.
For the first time since the trial began, Darrell Brooks was forced to sit and listen to victim and family members speak. Some of them took the opportunity to lash out at Darrell Brooks.
You are a monster. You deserve contempt and death. Sadly, with no death penalty in this state, I can only hope they lock you away someplace so deep the rats chew on your fingers at night. As for me, this will never be over until the day I'm pissing on your grave. I think it would be fair to say that for your crimes, even God hates you.
During his sentencing, Darrell Brooks' disrespectfulness inside of a courtroom is at an all-time high. As the victim impact statements are being read to the judge, he is at times laughing, clapping his hands, ignoring the speaker, reading his Bible, even patting his chest. At one point, one of those victims directly addresses Darrell's disrespect.
Please don't do that. It's so disrespectful. I've watched all day on TV, and I've watched you mock all of the victims all day. You roll your eyes and you make faces. If this was your 8-year-old daughter that someone else hit, you would have been beside yourself if someone made those faces. And you want people to have forgiveness for you and your child? You're insane. And I hope that you live in hell for the rest of your life for what you have done to all of these victims.
After the victim impact statements, it was time for Judge Dorow, who for weeks was at the center of the chaos created by Darrell Brooks, to deliver her sentence. But before she did that, she broke down, talking about the youngest victim, Jackson Sparks, and the effect it had on his family, including his brother Tucker Sparks.
It's hard not to think about what I watched and not have this reaction. Those were images that frankly kept me up at night, that I saw over and over and over. And I didn't realize how significantly Tucker had been injured. How Tucker somehow blames himself for his brother's death. It's not your fault, Tucker. It's Mr. Brooks's fault.
Judges are human. And I think judges recognize the true loss here. People had to bury their family members, their loved ones, and he murdered them.
On counts 1 through 6, this court is imposing a life sentence without the possibility or eligibility for extended supervision consecutive to one another. 1 life sentence for Virginia Sorensen. 1 life sentence for Leanna Owen. 1 life sentence for Tamara Durand. 1 life sentence for Jane Kulik. 1 life sentence for Bill Hospel. And 1 life sentence for Jackson Sparks.
The applause that happened, does that surprise you?
I mean, you know, generally that's very frowned upon in a court setting, and it was allowed temporarily because of the magnitude of the case and the relief for the families and the community.
This is their moment. And I think there is something about respecting the process, but also respecting the people. Now, she didn't allow it to get out of hand, but I think that little piece showed some humanity and showed, I think, some thoughtfulness on her part, and something that I think was at least a small nod to a lot of people who lost something that will never come back to them.
This was a case about 69 victims whose lives will never be the same. 6 of them passed away, their families inside the courtroom, but because of the behavior of the defendant who chose to represent himself, the memory of those victims was pushed to the wayside. This was all about a defendant who continued to argue with the judge nonstop, every day, all day, throughout the trial, his antics making national headlines, and he fed off of that. He loved every moment in the spotlight.
Darrell Brooks was self-important, self-absorbed, the smartest guy in the room, just ask him. And everybody saw that. Some things you can't hide, and when you decide to represent yourself, sometimes those are the first things you see. Oh, and the last.
Despite the pain and horror caused by Darrell Brooks' rampage, the community of Waukesha gathered the following year to celebrate the annual holiday parade.